Hello, my dears. I hope you're warm and preserved from the snowfall yet again. If you see me glancing over to my right, it's because just outside the window where I sit, there are deer in the forest, on the steeply sloping mountainous forest where we live, and it's lovely to see the deer against the snow and the bare trees. Um, so I hope this will find you well, even if you haven't got deer outside the window. A word, then, about the first work on our 18th century syllabus, which is Voltaire's Candide, which I hope you will pronounce in your head much the way I'm saying it. Um, a work of such charm that I would hate to imagine you leaving the 18th century without having read it. I think charm is its greatest quality. Some wonderful things are said in it. It's very witty, and it involves us with a young adventurer called Candide and his lady love, who it takes him his entire life finally to run to ground, um, and a pair of companion philosophers, the ultimate optimist in the form of a man called Pangloss, who was Candide's tutor when he was young, and who believes with Leibniz, or at least this was a satire on Leibniz, who didn't necessarily believe exactly this, but Pangloss believes that this is the best of all possible worlds. And so no matter what happens, he is able to work out why it's actually for the best, as people do. And Martin, the pessimist, who also accompanies them, who sees everything gloomily, which is understandable. He was robbed by his wife and betrayed by his sons and lost his job and basically started out his adult life on a very poor footing and has remained utterly skeptical about human happiness. So it's a delightful romp in the company of these people. Um, and I wouldn't say that it expressed the philosophical turn of the 18th century mind, but certainly it's true that Voltaire was a great believer in science and scientific investigation, and he embarked upon quite a lot of it himself. And he was witty about philosophical speculation, but utterly wedded to science, and as underwriting the happy future of man and man's progress. What philosophy ultimately the book contains is a matter of the very last line, which I will not anticipate for you, but which comes after our friends in the book, the young man and his companions, have been through a great many adventures for good and ill, and Candide has finally found his Cunégonde, his beloved. Alas, because this is a work of exquisite skepticism, if not cynicism, as well as charm. Cunégonde, by the time he finally catches up with her, has become a rather ugly old woman, having started off as a gorgeous young thing. But the great beauty of the book, and forgive me, spoiler alert, is that Candide remains the gentleman. And so there is an ending where all our characters are sitting around eating preserved citrons, I guess oranges, lemons, and pistachio nuts. And the joy of this is privileged by the characters, quite rightly, I think, above the lessons that their experiences in life might have taught them. Harsh lessons in the case of an old lady who only has one buttock as a result of having the other one cut off. Nevertheless, the immediate reality before them is a reality of preserved citrons and pistachio nuts. And that is where life exists, not in the realms of the mind, but in the immediate sensations of the flesh. And so that itself is a meditation, I think. I was tasked with teaching 18th century philosophy when I first started in an English department, and I had no more idea of 18th century philosophy than I did of subatomic physics. But we were told, as long as you're one class ahead of your students, you ought to be able to manage. This was all the students. This was a foundation course, 18th century philosophy. Everybody coming into this university, and there was a man, Donald Davy, a professor, who thought this up. Everybody had to do 18th century philosophy. And it was a very interesting chore. There's 18th century philosophy diverges greatly. It's an extremely contradictory age, and you will find contradiction everywhere, at the very heart of it. I think this is the creative charm of the 18th century, is its ability to diverge from itself. The first draft of Alexander Pope's essay on man, presumably his definitive pronouncement about the world, originally began describing the world as a mighty maze without a plan. But in the second draft, he revised that to a mighty maze, but not without a plan. So you can see that the 18th century thinker was a man besieged by disagreement with himself. It's fruitful, I think. It's beautiful in its own way. So what you have, I realize now, I cited Candide's beloved without pause, and it will give you pause to pronounce, even in your head, her name. In most translations into English, for reasons that I don't understand, her name, in French, Cunégonde, is translated as Cunigund. Anyway, gund at the end. The cune part is the obscene part, Latin canus, which became in English a vulgar word for the vagina, and in French it's con. And pauvre con, poor fool, poor idiot, poor sale con. It's a word used casually in French in the way that, begging your pardon, cunt is not. I mean, it is. It is in the sense that many people, certainly in British English more than American English, will throw that word around. But in French, you don't even have to throw it. It lies in your path and to trip over all the time. So the origins of the name Cunégonde may be faintly salacious. And certainly it is true in the story, as you will read, that the person who initiates the erotic liaison between our hero Candide and Cunégonde or Cunégonde is she. She observes their beloved tutor Pangloss instructing Paquette the maid in something more than 18th century philosophy. And she sees this and watches with fascination, and so ensures that at the earliest opportunity she takes Candide aside and encourages him to experiment with her as well, but he's caught, and that begins the long adventure of his life in pursuit of his darling beloved. It carries him all over the world into some of the more famous events of the 18th century. The Lisbon earthquake it's hard to think of what it's akin to. You might say 9/11 for the shock waves that the Lisbon earthquake sent through Europe. But primarily because it was a horrific event in which many people died, and there seemed no cause. It seemed a gratuitous example of God's unreasonableness, or indeed of the absence of God. So this problem of theology was, and please read a little about Voltaire's life, the one that dogged him. He was a formidable machine of writing, producing plays and pamphlets, a tremendous, unstoppable flow of words, but his words constantly got him into trouble because France was much more theologically narrow and tyrannical than Britain. He spent some years in exile in Britain, admired the British greatly for their much more pragmatic attitude to public morality and Christianity in practice. So in his life in France, he wound up in the feared prison, the Bastille, more than once for having offended bienséance, for having the suitableness of expression, with reference particularly to religion. And he and others of I think on our syllabus, certainly the Marquis de Sade, who wrote some of his memorable erotic works in prison, in the Bastille and in Charenton, the asylum where he eventually ended up. And it was not so bad in the Bastille. Poor Voltaire had a room that had no window. Some people had windows, and people came and went, friends came and went, food, meals were ordered, they lived in some comfort, as they did in the Tower of London, oddly enough. You think of it as a terrible place where people were immured waiting execution, but not exactly. These famed and feared prisons, when they had noblemen or noble women there, they treated them surprisingly generously. Anyway, this was Voltaire's fate, was constantly to be hounded for his irreligious remarks about the church. This doesn't mean he didn't believe in God. Many of the great thinkers and writers, like Isaac Newton, continued as deists. There had to have been a God to set this fascinating watch mechanism that is the universe going, but he's not answering calls. That's the thing that distinguishes deism from atheism, because in deism there is a God there, but he doesn't enter the fray. However, he's there. We need his existence to explain ours, and thus Voltaire remained a God-fearing man, also a police-fearing man. He had a house on the French side of the Swiss border and on the Swiss side of the French border, so he could hop across when the police came to drag him off to the Bastille for his latest indiscretion, a work that pilloried religion, organized religion. And in this, he certainly represents the 18th century, and in his love of science, he had an adventurous life, as does his hero Candide. He had mistresses. He had quite a lot of money, which is connected to his involvement in the lottery, which one thinks of as a modern thing. The lottery was a key aspect of 18th century life. And so take a look at his life and see who he was, a witty and much admired, a delightful human being who said things of great interest, even if he did not philosophize in an organized fashion. We have him to thank for a thought that is with us all the time now in 21st century America, certainly in Trumpian and post-Trump America. Voltaire said, people who make you believe absurd things can make you do atrocious things. This is really the thought of the hour at this moment, when conspiracy theorists have come out of their holes, have burst their bubbles, and come onto the stage to be applauded, and come into public life in such numbers that they control the behavior of one of the great political parties that rules this country. A terrifying thing to watch, a terrifying thing to live through, and Voltaire hit it on the nail with that remark. Maybe you will find some other sayings of his that I can ask you for in my quiz that you found interesting or provocative or atrocious and incorrect. He was a provocative man and remains widely read. Certainly Candide continues to be read as my lamp continues to go on and off, so you get a natural view of me as I am now, in real light, free of lamplight. So please Stay warm if you can today, quite difficult. Stay safe, stay masked, stay socially distanced, stay alive. Please look after yourselves and your family and your friends and your loved one, and hang on for a little longer, as horrible as it is to be isolated in this way. It's my pleasure, nonetheless, to come to you in this fashion, through the airwaves, I was going to say. Is it the airwaves? Or are we on electronic waves of some kind? Anyway, I'm thrilled to be a presence in your life and for you to be a presence in mine. And I hope we're able to enjoy the 18th century for a while this semester. All the best from me, your professor.